Greetings. Welcome to the first class in the sixth semester and the last class of the fifth semester of the Emerald Choral Academy. I'm Scott Kovacs. I'm the Executive Director of the Emerald Ensemble, a professional choir based in Seattle. The Emerald Choral Academy is a series of interactive webinars during which our area's leading professional choristers reveal their personal tricks of the trade to community singers. These webinars are then made freely available to singers across the world via YouTube. This presentation is funded in part by a grant from the Washington State Arts Commission, in addition to funds from the National Endowment for the Arts, For Culture, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, Washington Department of Commerce, and many generous donors. We encourage anyone participating or viewing this webinar to make a donation as you are able at emeraldensemble.org. This webinar is being recorded. By participating, you are granting the Emerald Ensemble permission to share your contribution. Your microphones and cameras will remain off for the duration of the presentation. You can ask questions to the presenter by typing into the chat or Q&A features at the bottom of your screen. Periodically, I'll interject to field your questions. I am your presenter for tonight's topic, vocal registration for the choral singer. As most of you know by now, I'm one of the co-founders of the Emerald Ensemble and the Emerald Choral Academy. I'm the artistic director of Ancora Women's Choir, executive director of the Medieval Women's Choir, and run a thriving voice studio that focuses on the needs of the choral singer, in addition to being a student in voice pedagogy for a Master's of Applied Science at the University of Wales through the Voice Study Center, where my topic is voice pedagogy and the choral singer. So with that, I am going to begin our presentation for the evening. Give me just a moment to share screen. All right, can someone please tell me that they can see the appropriate slide? I'm a little worried that you can see not only the main slide, but also, okay, great. All right. But you can't see my cheat slide on the next on the other side, right? Have I got it set up right? Good. Okay. Okay, hang on just a second. Let me switch this around then just a little bit. Give me just a second, folks. There we go. I knew how to do that. All right. We'll begin with the land acknowledgement for tonight. The Emerald Ensemble would like to acknowledge that we gather on the traditional land of the Coast Salish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the life of all the Coast Salish nations. Thanks, Carl. Good. I'm glad I got it right. There we go. Just a brief disclaimer that I put at the beginning of all of my Emerald Choral Academy sessions. All the information in this presentation is intended to be informational. It is not intended for the purpose of diagnosing or treating medical disorders. The Emerald Choral Academy is not responsible for conditions that require a licensed professional for diagnosis or treatment. If you're experiencing symptoms that might require a diagnosis, seek medical attention. And I am, of course, ethically limited in what I am able to speak to you about. I'm not able to diagnose. I'm not able to prescribe medication. I'm not able to recommend medication. All of those things should be done by a qualified medical professional or speech language pathologist. If you have any questions about that or need recommendations or want to talk more about that, please reach out to me after the presentation. All right, I'm going to launch a quick poll. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to zip past this. I spent so much time on the opening slide that I'm going to zip past the poll. All right, we've got some learning outcomes to discuss for tonight. The object of tonight is that we will understand the difference between head, chest, and mixed voice. You will be able to identify head, chest, and mixed registers in your own voice, and that you will understand how registration can aid in blend, intonation, and tone color as a choral singer. And this is where my particular interest lies, is improving the experience of choral singers through voice science and voice pedagogy. Okay, what are voice registers, vocal registers? What are registers? The One of the most succinct current definitions of voice registers comes from the vocal pedagogist Scott McCoy in his 2012 book, who says a series of adjacent pitches that are produced in the same physiological manner that share the same essential timbre. So in general, a register, the pitches are right next to each other until it changes, and then you've got another set of pitches that are right next to each other. But they're produced in the same manner, meaning using the same position or technique of the voice, the position of the larynx, posture of the nasopharynx, and the timbre, the essential feel, the way it feels in your mouth, and our perception of that sound are the same. Now, the lengthy definition comes from 19th century voice pedagogy, Manuel Garcia, 1894, who was one of the early voice pedagogists. Every voice is formed of three distinct portions or registers, namely a chest voice, which is what I'm speaking in right now, a medium voice, which is the middle voice, and a head voice, which is your highest. A register is a series of consecutive homogeneous sounds produced by one mechanism different from another series of sounds equally homogeneous, produced by another mechanism, whatever modifications of timbre or strength they may offer. Each of these three registers, oh gosh, I need a break already, has its own extent and sonority, which vary, V-A-R-Y, not V-E-R-Y, according to the sex of the individual and the nature of the organ. Well, isn't that delightful? I'm really grateful for Scott McCoy's much more succinct definition. I also want to note that tonight we're going to be talking primarily about functional vocal registers as opposed to acoustic vocal registers. Acoustic voice registers or vocal registration is a fairly new topic that's been discussed primarily by Ken Bozeman, Ian Howell, some other acousticians. Today we're primarily talking about functional vocal registers that has to do with the way the anatomy of the larynx is involved in creating the registration events that we're going to talk about today and the tonal outcomes they represent. Okay. One voice pedagogist in 2007 referred to this very subject as the snake pit of voice pedagogy. It's a bit of a sticky wicket, and there's a lot of terminology that overlaps, that divides, simply because we have developed different ways of talking about this particular subject. So the snake pit of voice pedagogy is vocal registers. The three takeaways of vocal registration that, again, from Scott McCoy, a register is composed of contiguous pitches, right? So the pitches are right next to each other. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. They're all right next to each other. The pitches within any given register, whether it's chest voice or head voice, are produced in the same physiological manner. In other words, the laryngeal mechanism and the subsystems of the voice are in the same relative position throughout a registration, through a register. Pitches within any given register share the same basic timbre. So by timbre, we mean color or likeness of sound. So we think of timbre, we think of the timbre of a brass instrument versus the timbre of an oboe or a wind instrument, or double reed instrument. So they sound the same, and they also feel the same. So when you're singing in your chest voice, or when you're speaking in your chest voice, even when you're varying your pitch in your chest voice, it feels like it's the same. When you're speaking or singing in your head voice, depending, even if you vary the pitch, if those pitches are contiguous, it still feels like it's your head voice. So there's a sensation of something being in the head voice or in the chest voice or mixed. So we talk about the chest voice, we talk about the head voice, and then there's this sort of foggy middle zone that overlaps. So if you think of the Venn diagram of the head voice and the chest voice, there's this place in the middle called the mixed voice, and this is really where a lot, or voix mixte, if you are using the pedagogical terms, this is where there's a lot of controversy about nomenclature and even physiology of the mixed voice. More about that later. There are some other registers that include Fry, which is very, very high. It's and most frequently associated with male voices. And then there's the belt, which is something we think of in classical or in contemporary and commercial music. So just quickly, we'll go over, I'm going to try to find a better version of, here's laser pointer. So we generally talk about the muscles of the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles of the larynx. So these are the muscles that are involved in voice production. So if we were to look down up on the larynx at the vocal mechanism itself, this is the front. This is right here, Adam's apple for some of us. This is where the hyoid bone protrudes outwards in a way that you can feel, right? So the most important things here to look at are the vocal ligament, which is the outside edge of the vocal fold, the vocalis muscle itself, and these are of course covered. Well, these are covered in the propria lamina, and then three layers of collagen tissue, and then an epithelial layer, or mucosal layer outside that helps keep things lubricated. We have the cricothyroid, the cricocartilage, and the cricoarytenoid muscles, these are primarily involved in the adduction and abduction of the vocal fold, including the transverse arytenoid muscles here. So we have the ability to close the vocalis muscles into a position to create vibration. These are also somewhat involved in the lengthening of the vocal folds. So when we think of the thickness of the vocal folds, we're thinking here and here. And when we're thinking of the lengthening of the vocal folds, we're thinking here and here. The extrinsic muscles of the larynx are the ones you can probably feel. In particular, we're interested in these sort of longer muscles along here that cradle, protect, and support in the neck area. The sternocleidomastoid is one of the everybody's favorite because you can see it when you turn your head. Um, all of these muscles have the same sort of issues as when you run or work out, which is when we use them a lot, they tend to stay in an adducted or contracted position because of the collection of lactic acid and other enzymes in the tissue. So one of the things that when we're doing our head and neck rolls, we're sort of breaking up the tension in these longer muscles and helping the larynx to move a little bit more freely, float more freely in the neck, which helps in the changes that occur with vocal registration. All right, so how do I find my registers? Okay, so the chest voice is easy. Hey, hey, just yell to yourself. Hey, hey, probably your chest voice. It has a heavy feel to it. Most people say their own name in their chest voice. So if I'm really looking for somebody's chest voice in a voice lesson to start vocalizing for the first time, I don't know their voice much, I have them speak their full name, and it's a way for them to help me identify their uh, the middle ground of their chest voice usually. The head voice is usually discovered in the whoop register. So if you make a whoop sound, you're likely to find your head voice. It generally feels light. There's less resonance down here. You get a sense that the head voice feels resonant in the head and the chest voice feels resonant in the chest. And you can practice those on your own. All right, so now the middle ground. The mixed voice, which is the one that I think confuses people the most, and oftentimes choral singers don't know that this is available to them as an option. We either have just the head voice or we have just the chest voice. The mixed voice results from a balanced but mixed configuration of the intrinsic muscles of the larynx. That's the TA and CT dominant. So if we go back to here, we are talking about a balance between the cricothyroid muscles and the transverse arytenoid muscles, transverse and oblique um, uh, muscles up here, up here. So we'll go back. The 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 mixed voice can extend well above and well below the passaggio. So that passaggio, the zona di passaggio, the passage, that 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 place in the voice where we naturally switch from chest voice to head voice. And we'll talk more about how to find that passage a little bit later on. And it's the spot that's in between hey and whoop. So there's a great way. Our friends at Voice Science Works have this great way to help people discover their mixed voice and what that feels like, and it's the three birds game. So the the chest voice sounds and feels like a duck. Quack, 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 quack. That's definitely my chest voice. Head voice is like a dove or a pigeon. Coo, 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 coo. Definitely in my head voice. The mixed voice sounds and feels more like a goose. Haw, 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 haw. There's a balance of the chest or uh, thyroarytenoid heavy sound and a balance of the cricothyroid dominant sound, the head voice. So it's duck, quack, 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 dove, coo, 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 and goose, haw, 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 to help you find your chest, head, and mixed registers. Everyone's at home right now making goose sounds, which I just love. All right, so now let's talk about that passaggio. I want to talk a little bit about the word break because oftentimes I have a student will come and say, "Well, I that's my break, right? That's where my break is at," and that's a word that I try to avoid as much as possible in the studio and in rehearsal with my choirs as well, because break connotes something that's not working. And what we really want to think about is that spot in the voice just being the boundary between the two registers, between your chest and your head voice. So I refer to these, and so does Richard Miller, by the way. The term is from Richard Miller, is a registration event. So we replace the word break, which connotes something that's not working, with registration event, which is um, uh, which is just a little more descriptive of what is actually happening because it's not a single moment in your voice. It's actually um, a long series of actions and changes happening physiologically and acoustically. So we talk about registration events in two qualities, dynamic or static. And the static registration event is the one that we think of as the break. Static registration events, oftentimes we associate this sound with uh, uh, people who are in a testosterone influenced puberty having their voice change. So this is the sort of sound. So I'll demonstrate a static registration event, and this is why it evolved with the term break. You can hear a little blurp, a little burp in the tone as the pitch rises. And that's a static registration event going from chest voice to head voice. And I'll demonstrate one that is dynamic, which is smooth and connected and does not demonstrate the moment that we switch from the thyroaretinoid dominant sound or the chest voice to the cricothyroid dominant sound or the head voice. So here's dynamic registration change. I actually did a better job on the way down than I did on the way up, which physiologically makes sense because we're actually adding pressure to the instrument on the way up, and we're relieving pressure on the instrument or stress on the instrument on the way down, the vocal instrument on the way down. So sometimes it's a little easier. I'm a little froggy today. I had a lot of postnasal drip when I woke up this morning. So it's a little harder for me to make that registration event on the way up in a dynamic fashion and a little easier on the way down. This is something we all experience as singers, whether professional voice users or um, or amateur. So the idea with learning how to use your registers is that we coordinate them. And that means that when we're in rehearsal, we're in performance, we're in studio, we're able to go from the chest voice to the head voice and back in a way that not only is easy, but that keeps the tonal spectrum or keeps the tonal color the same. So if we don't go from a really brassy or bright chest voice yeah, to a very covered and dull or not very vibrant head voice. Yeah. But we want to be able to keep that registration unifier, the color unified across registers. Yeah. The color is essentially the same all the way through. Let's see. Oh, well, the flip. So where is your flip? Uh, you can uh, um, you can practice with yourself by starting at a comfortable place in a low voice. Oh, now I can't do it. I hate when that happens. It's useful to know where your pivot point is or where the flip is in your registration event. So it does help us to know, for example, what your voice type is. So I know that my registration event is at a C sharp, and that helps me, a C sharp above middle C, and that helps me determine that I'm probably a bass baritone or in the bass baritone family. Voice registers do definitely help us to determine. So, like I mentioned, mine is in the C4 in the area of C sharp. So I'm in a choral setting. I'm probably going to be singing in the bass section. If I were to listen to your voice and your registration event were between D4, somewhere between D4 and F4, so that's the D above middle C to the F above middle C, I would say that you're going to be singing tenor. And then if your registration event is somewhere between A sharp and C sharp above middle C, you're probably an alto or a contralto. And then for sopranos, you're way up there at D5, F5. So when I'm seating my choir folks, I'm listening to the registration event to help me determine which section is going to be best for them. I'm also listening to range, I'm listening to color, I'm listening to a whole bunch of other factors, but this is one determining point in which section a singer would be sitting in one of my ensembles. So I think the next slide has some yuck factor. So for those of you that are not interested in seeing working anatomy, you can look away for just a moment. I would like for you to see what a working registration event, what a registration event looks like in a working set of vocal folds. This is a stroboscopic um, um presentation of working vocal folds. Think I think the registration change happens at about the 7-second mark, if I remember correctly. Great. So we'll go back. We'll watch that one more time. So you'll notice that the length this is a set of these vocal folds are definitely with someone who had a testosterone influenced puberty, and they're thicker, they're wider, they're longer. It's a little easier to see a registration event on this particular in this particular set of vocal folds. You'll notice that the vocal folds, the cricoretinocartilage cartilages in the back change position, and the vibration along the folds changes just a little bit. So again, this is the anterior, this is the posterior, this is the back, and this is the front. Here it is. So that's the registration change, and then you get adduction at the end there with vocal fold opening. So uh, the other thing you may notice is that the vocal folds they don't just the edges don't just smack up against each other. They don't just beat up against each other. They actually flutter like a butterfly. It's a valve that opens and closes uh, in a butterfly-like manner. It's a very fascinating bit of our anatomy. All right, moving on. Okay, so we've talked about head voice, chest voice, and mix. There are a few others. There's belting, which is particularly you see frequently in commercial music, contemporary commercial musics, musical theater, some of the other formats that are adjacent to that. And the best way for you to find your belting voice is, "Hey, taxi! Hey, hey, taxi!" It's a healthy yell. It's also a technique that needs to be taught in order to be um, uh, helpful and to be used over the long term without presenting the possibility of disuse or vocal damage over a long period of time. So belting is definitely something, if it's something that you're attracted to, if you want to do a lot of musical theater, make sure that your voice professional really knows how to teach this particular technique. Falsetto is uh, uh, most commonly, again, this is a little bit of a shifty area because some vocal pedagogists insist that the head voice is falsetto, and some vocal pedagogists insist that falsetto is another register above the head voice. Depends on who you talk to. Frytone is where we get, frytone refers to the idea of bacon frying. And by the way, it makes a great warm up and a great cool down if you've had a long day of singing, or if you're about to have a long day of singing. And if you listen, if any of you are happen to be heavy metal listeners, we get a lot of the technique around dirty vocals for heavy metal comes from using frytone. So some of those folks that are doing that are very, very well trained by expert voice teachers in how to do that. And then I would venture into one of my favorite subjects, and that's the idea of vibrato versus straight tone, or vibrato and straight tone. Why don't I go there? So vibrato is a naturally occurring phenomenon in the voice. It's a nice gentle quaver in the voice. An oscillation is the term that voice pedagogists use that demonstrates that the voice is free and that it is that there is no constricting of the glottal mechanism holding the larynx in place. And the reason that this is important is because as the proliferation of straight tone over the last 50 or 60 years, particularly in American Midwest choirs, and before that, um, straight tone as a genre, as a color for choral ensemble, is an important artistic choice. It is a tonal choice for an ensemble. What it does not do is solve problems with intonation. Those things come from making better choices with registration, which is why we're here, and for using the voice in a way that creates vibrancy in order for intonation to take place efficiently and without having to force sharpness or flatness as a substitute for an appropriate vocal registration or acoustic registration for the vowel that we're singing. There is the idea of vibrancy, which is the ability to produce tone at the fundamental level without oscillation, without vibration, that creates a minimum amount of constriction at the laryngeal mechanism. So I can sing a very non-vibrato sound. I can go back and forth, as a matter of fact, between vibrato and non-vibrato without constricting my laryngeal mechanism. So I'm going to go from vibrato to vibrant tone to straight tone with a constricted larynx. So here, that'll be the pattern. The final version had me pressing laterally, constricting the mechanism. So the problem for me as a singer and for many singers is that when you are constricting the vocal mechanism in that straight tone, the necessary changes to the mechanism, which include the larynx tilting forward, are harder to make, and you're more likely to incur that static registration event or have difficulty making registration changes in the choral ensemble setting. So I will demonstrate, I think I can demonstrate what will happen for me as a singer, creating high pressure straight tone and trying to attempt a registration event. So I will start I will go vibration. I will vibrate. Vibrance, I will use vibrato, non-vibrato, vibrant, and then straight tone, and then I will attempt a registration event. So it'll be. The tone gets strangled on the way up, and I'm exaggerating to make a point. There are people that can make that registration event easily, even though they're singing straight tone. The choral singers in general, unless you are singing a genre specific type of music, need some freedom to make those registration events as we're singing. So that's something that I advocate for in my choirs and in my studio with my choral singers. I also want to talk about the singer's format for just a second. This is kind of a catchphrase or it's a very important term in singing, which is that there are a series of harmonics in the overtone series that are produced by the human voice that can be tuned by the nasopharynx, by your tongue, by the position of your tongue, um, and by laryngeal position as well, that help to create a particular set of frequencies that provide tone color useful for doing things like singing over an orchestra or creating specific tone that is for extended technique or color. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. The singer's format in general, but not always, is not a particularly useful set of tool for choral singing. In general, but not always. The singer's formant is it creates um, a quality of sound that is often very difficult to blend with. Although, for example, there was a recent study in Spain of choral singers that work as opera, they're an opera as opera chorus singers. And shout out to all of our friends at the Seattle Opera tonight that are singing in the chorus that use the singer's formant specifically in the chorus to assist them in getting their sound in the chorus out over the stage, out over the orchestra. The technique that I commend to most choral singers is the idea of vibrancy. It's a free sound that is not necessarily interrupted by a vibrato that interrupts the tone. So we don't want vibrato that will interrupt the production of good intonation. So on the right here is a singer using the singer's formant. This is the fundamental pitch. These are all the overtones that are generally, this is the fundamental, the octave, the fifth, fourth, third, minor third, second. And then we start getting into the other overtones, which create something called auditory roughness. And sometime I'll do a presentation on auditory roughness. This is a singer who's probably singing a very bright, brassy sound because they're emphasizing some of the upper harmonics in the singer's formant. On the left, and this is a very low pitch, you can see over here on the piano, this singer is singing a low D sharp. This is the fundamental pitch. That corresponds to this pitch. That's the fundamental, the octave, the fifth, the fourth, the third, minor third, second, and then way up here are all the other overtones that are above the 4,000 hertz range here are all the overtones that are useful to our auditory perception, but are involved in other processes. This particular singer is really creating vibrant tone. There's a solid fundamental, and then we have a nice scaling of the formant above it. The most important thing, so this is probably a free tone, one that does not sound brassy or bright, and can probably be blended with or is easy to tune to, which is a good thing because this person is clearly a bass and they're probably providing fundamental pitch for the ensemble. So variables to consider in registration include breath. You have subglottal air pressure, supraglottal air pressure, and transglottal air pressure. So transglottal just means what's going on as the air pressure as the breath passes through the vocal folds at the laryngeal level. So, and aerodynamics. Everybody's anatomy creates different kinds of aerodynamics in the throat, in the mouth, in the larynx itself, right? So the amount of air pressure that you're using during a registration event or as you're approaching registration can be very, very important. The amount of breath, the velocity of air, and the volume of air as well. Laryngeal configuration. So by this, we talk about mode 1 and mode 2. There's a mode 0 and a mode 3 as well, at least theoretically. But mode 1 is generally chest voice. Mode 2 is generally that cricothyroid dominant or head voice. And the interesting thing that we don't think about often is this is Larry the Larynx. I hope he's showing up. Let me put him in front of me so that he shows up. When the registration event goes from mode 1, which is low in the throat, to mode 2, which is higher in the throat, the larynx also tilts forward. So there's this motion, planar motion, this way in mode 2, that includes the cricothyroids pulling backwards and lengthening the vocal folds. So you have, which is another good reason not to have a highly tense environment or a lot of constriction in the mechanism, including things like tongue root tension, which can really affect the efficiency of the repositioning of your larynx. And then there's acoustic variations in the vocal tract. Our mouths are shaped differently. Everybody's mouth is shaped differently. Um, we have different dentition. Our teeth are different. Our jaws can be shaped differently. We can have narrow jaw. We can have higher palate shape. All of those things change the way the acoustics work inside your mouth, and will also affect, in one way or another, registration. And then there's the idea of psychoacoustics and perception, and this is all about the neurology of singing and the neurology of hearing, and the idea of the way we perceive sound is being vital to how we produce sound. And one of the things I like to tell my singers is that, we as singers, we're all about our ears. We're always listening, 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 listening for our own intonation. We're listening, as choral singers, we're listening for the intonation of the people next to us and in our section and across the choir, and we're getting feedback from the room, hopefully, that informs our sense of intonation. It is also vital for us as choral singers to be paying attention to what we're sensing in our bodies, what we're feeling. Am I uncomfortable? Is there tension anywhere from my jaw to the top of my chest? Is my back sore? Do I feel the chair on my back as I'm breathing? Can I sense that my shoulders are resting on top of my rib cage rather than being responsible for drawing the rib cage up as I'm breathing? All these things are very important in the production of good tone, registration, and ultimately the performance of the instrument. There are so many different ways to talk about tonal color: brassy, twang, diffuse, bright, dark. Chiaroscuro is a term that we use to talk about the brightness and darkness of sound. And Ken Bozeman does a wonderful presentation on how you can discover chiaroscuro through whispering. Lofted sound, pressed sound, over sound, warm sound, cool. I think of Stewie when I see cool. Cool sound, shimmer, and then light. There are so many different ways to talk about this. And Ken Bozeman, again, I'll borrow from Ken on this, talks about affect in tone, and each one of these has an affect associated with it. You could probably put an emotion on every single one of these. What if we chose anger for brassy? Well, you never do the dishes. What if we, did, sad for diffuse? Well, it's just been such an awful week. There, so sometimes associating an affect with a tonal color is a way to arrive at reproducing that color, even in registration. And again, one of the things that we want to think about in terms of registration is that unification of color. So if we're choosing a covered sound in our registration, oh, oh, we want that cover to be effective from the chest voice all the way into the head voice. Oh, oh. That's a unified tone, color, unified registration all the way across. Okay, what? Now here's the why. This is kind of the reason we're all here. And in talking about the tonal outcomes of registration choice. So by tonal outcomes, everything that we just talked about relative to us as choral singers. So we as choral singers, one, blend, right? Is choosing a registration that unifies color and sound. All blend means is unanimity of tone color in an ensemble. That's it. It's not a big mysterious thing. So choosing a registration that unifies color and sound. So your registration choices may be different from your seatmate because their instrument is different. But the tonal outcome, or the tonal outcome to the audience at the podium with the conductor, should be that there's a unified sound. Balance. Choosing registration that encourages balance. So if I know that my bright, brassy sound tends to stick out from my seatmates or encourages my seatmates to oversing, then I might want to make registration choices that allows me to hold the balance of the ensemble in mind. So maybe modifying my tone color just a little bit and the registration choices that I make. For example, if I know that I am going to be singing D's for high D's for a long period of time that are not necessarily forte in the music, I would want to choose maybe a mixed register or a head register in order to maintain the balance of dynamic in my section. So if that's a high D, but it's supposed to be piano, and the only way I can sing it is to yell it, I might want to choose to put that in my head voice as a way to maintain the balance in the section. Intonation, choosing a registration that encourages tonal accuracy, right? If we're pressing tone, if we're pressing the tone, it's hard to demonstrate this. I can probably do it as a scale. So it's really hard to keep that intonation consistent on the way down. If I start in the head voice and I go down into the chest voice, mixing as I go and making modifications to the vowel, I'm able to keep a balanced dynamic. I'm able to keep and I'm able to keep the pitches in tune, and the vowel color is fairly consistent all the way down. And now lastly, style. Choosing a registration appropriate for the genre. Now, again, there are some techniques that we apply that are genre specific. When we're doing Renaissance polyphony, the tone is going to be very non-vibrato, right? So we want to choose a registration that's appropriate for the genre. If we're doing 20th century music with very, very tight harmonies, if you're doing the Schnecter Choir Concerto, we want to choose something that provides an opportunity for those tight harmonies or those close notes to sound correct together. If we're doing chant, we may want to choose something that's more vibrant and a little free so that the unison has a chance to express itself in a meaningful way. Unisons are very hard to sing well, by the way, in my opinion. All right. I want to thank all of these people who have contributed to my functional knowledge today. And of course, do credit where credit is due on all of this. If any of you are interested in this list of references, it's on the website at emeraldensemble.org. All right, I am going to turn off the share and open it up to, I did it in 50 minutes. I did it. All right. I'm happy. I'm happy with that. Are there any questions that I can answer about what we've had so far? Oh, good heavens. I couldn't have covered the topic that well. There's nothing in the Q&A, and I don't think there's anything in the chat that I can see on the subject. Nothing at all. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, it's a weedy topic. So if any of you think of any questions or you have any questions that come up later on, don't hesitate to email me about this. It's a tricky subject, and one that I've waded into some controversy with. Yeah, can I talk about vibrato types? Tell me more. Tell me more about that question, um, uh, Beatrix. I think so. Hmm, yeah. So the idea around vibrato is that we don't want it to interrupt pitch, the clarity of pitch, right? We never want it to interrupt clarity of pitch. There are some affects that happen um, that in that within that oscillation. So there's sort of an acceptable distance, and I don't know what it is, but there's an acceptable distance for that sine wave to oscillate in the vibrato spectrum. Um, there are some generally we think of tremolo, right? which is sort of an uncontrolled wobble or in the sound. And I'm wondering if that's what you're asking about. Um, um, uh, the um, the truth is there's very little effective research on vibrato that doesn't look like, yeah, so vibrato versus vibrance. All right. So vibrancy is an effect that shows that the fundamental pitch is there in a way that represents the pitch cleanly without any perturbance or interference at all. So a vibrant tone is just on the edge. It's just on the edge of vibrato. I can just push that over to vibrato. So I went from a vibrant tone to vibrato. The idea is that vibrant tone holds the larynx, holds the laryngeal subsystems of the larynx with a minimum of tension, right? The minute we add so much tension that that we're controlling the sound, over controlling the sound, we begin to run into problems with registration. And believe it or not, that can contribute later on, I believe, to some other kinds of problems like vocal fatigue or some other disuse kinds of issues. Effect of palatal turosis on tone. The answer is I don't know. I'm sure there is. Um, the physiology part of the palate and tone are very interrelated, particularly when it comes, Stephanie, to acoustic registration or vowel shaping and vowel migration within the creation of tone. I don't know much about that, and maybe I should know more. Glad you asked, and maybe I'll go out and do some reading and find out for you. If I find anything out, I'll send that along to you for sure. But I don't want to speak to the subject without any knowledge at all. Yeah. When choosing a registration, what are your tips for what's most important? Blend or balance or intonation, or it seems like style would be the province of the director. For the others, how would I choose? Yes, style is definitely the responsibility of the director. Um, I would say that when choosing registration, the most important thing is creating a good feeling in your instrument. It's creating a good sensation while you're singing, because good feelings while you're singing equates to an efficient tone production. And we always want to be in a place where we have an efficient tone production. So the question, what's most important, blend, balance, or intonation, is what's important to you in your experience in that moment as a singer. And it's going to change based on the piece of music that you're singing, and it's going to change based on your health at that particular moment. It's going to change based on what your voice is doing at that particular point in time in your life. Um, there are all those variables are variables that you as the singer have to consider in a way that contributes best to the ensemble and to your ensemble singing. So that's a non-answer to your question. But play with it, experiment with what registration provides for you individually in rehearsal. That's what rehearsal's for. And if someone pokes you and goes, "What are you doing?" you can tell them, "Well, Kovacs told me to try this." And then if you have any questions about that, you can always reach out to me and I'll help you with that. Any other questions? I also do recommend, this is something that I'm evangelizing, is that it is okay for choral singers to have voice lessons, and that your voice teachers can in fact work with you on your choir music. I have many voice students who bring their choir music with them. We're not working on necessarily the 24 Italian arias or art songs. They're bringing their choir music in, and we're working on "O Taste and See." We're working on the anthem that they're singing that Sunday in church, or we're working on whatever those tricky spots are in their music for their community chorus or their the chorus that they sing on a Monday night. So go to your voice professional and say, hey, I want to try working on registration with this and see what happens as I go over that passaggio where I feel like I'm lifting too much of my voice up with me. All right. All right. All right. Are there any other questions? I need to do my official outro. We at the Emerald Ensemble, are grateful for your enthusiasm, our audiences and supporters. As the Emerald Choral Academy continues, you can help to support those efforts by donating at emeraldensemble.org. You can also let us know of topics that you would like to see us discuss in the future, and you can send those to info@emeraldensemble.org. Our next scheduled presentation will be Vehicular Warm-Ups with Ryan Beatty on March 10th. Registration for that course will be, and the others, as we are able to slate them, will be opening in early February. In the meantime, I'm Scott Kovacs, and on behalf of Gary Cannon and all the Emerald Ensemble, I wish you good physical, mental, and musical health. Thank you.